Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce our friend, Dr. Allen Berger. We're continuing our series of workshops on the theme of emotional sobriety. Dr. Berger will speak to our group on this on the first Monday of each month throughout 2022. And I want to take a break and tell you that he and Herb switched weeks. So this month is a little bit different. So Herb spoke on the first Monday of July, and Allen's here taking Herb's time because Herb took his. And tonight is the fifth part of his discussion of how we can apply the 12 essential insights for emotional sobriety, which is Allen's latest book, to our recovery and growth in our programs. Let me tell you a little bit about Allen if you don't know. Allen recently celebrated 50 years of sobriety using the 12 steps, and over 40 years as a practicing psychotherapist specializing in addiction recovery with an emphasis on emotional sobriety. So he knows his stuff. Dr. Berger brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to us each month in his presentations that are then followed by the Q&A I told you about. Tonight is about insight number 5, which happens to be realizing that no one is coming. So let me tell you a little bit about that. It suggests that the healing process is an inside job. The case study in the chapter shows that essentially we all have the inherent resources necessary to heal ourselves, and warns against the toxic idea that someone else or another person or external system can fix us. I'm not going to read any more about that. He's going to fill you in on all the details. So here we go. Allen will be talking about that fifth insight, and it is my pleasure to turn everything over to him, and I can't wait to hear what he has to teach me this week. Thanks. And if I can't find Allen.
I'm right here, Susie.
Oh, how could I miss you?
But sticking with this insight, I probably shouldn't have shown up.
Why?
Because this is no one is coming.
What did I do?
No, insight number 5 is called no one is coming.
Oh, I just screwed up. I typed it wrong. I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, unfortunately, I can hear exactly what you just said.
No, but it's a fun. I'm making it funny, which obviously
I hope
you got lost on you. I'm sorry about that. So what I'm just saying is that this insight about no one is coming, and then here you talk about me coming to teach you guys all these things, but this whole chapter is about no one is coming. You got it?
I get it now. I am so slow today. I'm sorry.
Well, listen, it's better to be slow than to be never.
But it is good to see you. Make no mistake.
Good to see you, and I'm glad to be here. And last week, Herb switched with me because I was celebrating the 4th of July with my daughter who flew out from Los Angeles. And so we were going to Washington's Crossing, where Washington crossed the Delaware in December 25th, way back in the days, and really had the first success in the American Revolutionary War, which really catapulted us into our freedom. So I was over there celebrating the birth of our country. So it was a very exciting day for me, and to share it with my daughter was wonderful. Today, we're going to be talking about my book. I'll be sharing my screen in a minute, but I do say this, I may have to just check out for a couple minutes because a repair person is coming over. A refrigerator is going crazy and somebody's coming to repair it. So I just might need to let him in, show him where the things are at, and then be right back. So I just wanted to give you guys a heads up about that. The good news is the jackhammering is stopped, so we're not going to have to be listening to the foundation of this house being shaken to bits all morning. I was saying, my God, can I go down and ask them to stop? And wouldn't you know it? Guess what? At 1:30, the guy comes up and says, I think I'm finished for today. Well, that's just wonderful. Things like that just happen in life sometimes. Okay, well, let me jump into this. I'm going to share my screen with you, and we will dig into this talk today. All right. So can everybody see that okay? Susie, you see the screen good? Wonderful. I can't hear you. You're muted, Susie.
Yes, it's perfect. Someone muted me.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So as Susie was mentioning, we are going through chapter by chapter of the essential insights in my new book, 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety. It's available on Amazon and through Kindle, so you can reach it there. But let's start with this. I really have been thinking about emotional sobriety as a process that transcends and really transforms a consciousness of emotional dependency and moves us towards a consciousness of emotional freedom. Now, hopefully, if you've been listening to my previous presentations, you understand some of what that means. Today, I hope to elaborate on this even more. So another way to think about it, that if we're going to transcend our emotional dependence, we must become aware of how our behavior is determined, influenced by the gravitational forces created by our emotional dependence. Bill called it almost absolute dependence. Without that awareness, we cannot grow beyond. So it seems like a paradox, but for those of us that have worked the 12 steps, we are quite familiar with paradox because that's what happened to us in step 1. The moment that we admitted our powerlessness, we started to find a new power. So this becomes a very important part of our experience in recovery, and especially an important aspect of the process of change. See, change is paradoxical. We don't change by trying to be someone we're not. We change once we take full responsibility for who we are and how we have created our existence. It's in that moment that a new possibility is born. But without the full admission and acceptance and ownership of what we've done, we cannot change our behavior. If I am a liar and I want to become honest, I can't just start being honest without saying I'm a liar. I need to own my dishonesty in order to become honest. So that's going to be a very important part of everything I talk about, is understanding this paradoxical nature of change.
Suddenly, I realized what the matter was. My basic flaw had always been dependence, almost absolute dependence on people or circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. Failing to get these things according to my perfectionist dreams and specifications, I had fought for them. And when defeat came, so did my depression.
So this was the aha moment that Bill had. And this was Bill owning his dependence. He called it almost absolute dependence on people, circumstances to supply him with prestige, self-esteem, security, meaning that he was going to feel all right, and everything else. And when these things didn't happen according to his ideas, his perfectionist dreams and specifications, he fought for them. And when people didn't go along with his ideas, he felt defeated and he became depressed. This was the awareness that grew Bill Wilson's emotional sobriety. Without this awareness, his emotional sobriety would have never grown. Let's listen to what else he said about it.
There wasn't a chance of making the outgoing love of St. Francis a workable and joyous way of life until these fatal and almost absolute dependencies were cut away. Because I had over the years undergone a little spiritual development, the absolute quality of these frightful dependencies had never before been so starkly revealed.
Well, when I came in the program, people talked about more will be revealed. And if you stay the course, you will experience that as well. I say it this way, and it's kind of weird how this is another one of those paradoxes. The better you get, the worse you'll realize you are. I'll say that again. The better you get, the more you're able to see who you're not. Another way I've said it is that only the best in you can see the worst in you. But if you don't have a best in you that's developed yet, you can't see that yet. So there's something that has to happen as we grow in recovery. And as we do, we can get more and more honest with ourselves. And I think those of you that have been trudging the past for a while know exactly what I mean. Well, here's another thing that Bill said about this whole thing.
Reinforced by what grace I could secure in prayer, I found I had to exert every ounce of will and action to cut off these faulty emotional dependencies upon people, upon AA, indeed upon any act or circumstance whatsoever. Then could I be free to love as Francis did. Emotional and instinctual satisfactions I saw were really the extra dividends of having love, offering love, and expressing love appropriate to each relation of life.
So I think this is a very, very important suggestion Bill is making to us. If we want to clean this up, we have to focus on this in our life. He said he had to exert every ounce of will and action. That means he had to make this a priority, a number one priority to his recovery, to work on and develop emotional sobriety. In fact, in 1950, when he was writing the 12 and 12, he stated in step 12 that if we practice these principles in our daily affairs, that we and those about us begin to discover emotional sobriety. You see, the goal of recovery is, once we get our physical sobriety, is to become emotionally sober, which means, and just, it's synonymous with emotional maturity. It's synonymous with differentiation. It's synonymous with growing up. This is the challenge for us. And in this insight, which builds on the other insights we've had, first insight I talked about was that we have to wake up out of the trance. Gurdjieff said that we're all asleep, dreaming that we're awake. And we're asleep because we've been conditioned by a lot of different forces, some of which we will explore today, to function a certain way in this life, thinking that that's the only way. But if you've heard me say and Herb say many, many times, is that quote by Einstein, that the consciousness that creates a problem cannot solve it. And that's the dilemma we're at, that what put us to sleep is not going to wake us up. That something else has to happen, that we have to now open ourselves up to some new possibilities. And to me, that's what recovery is about. And as we wake up, we start to develop, we start living a conscious life, right? We start to increase our awareness of how we function, what we're doing, how we're doing it. Then we start to see our emotional dependency. We start to discern it in our life. And now we come to this point, then we come to a place in realizing that our emotional dependency gets us to take things personally. Well, now it also sets us up to be rescued. And that's why this chapter is so important, because this chapter says no one is coming to solve your problems. You're going to need to participate in that. And that's what Bill is telling us here. We have to exert every ounce of will and action if we want to grow ourselves along this line.
Plainly, I could not avail myself to God's love until I was able to offer it back to Him by loving others as He would have me. And I couldn't possibly do that so long as I was victimized by false dependencies. For my dependencies meant demand, a demand for the possession and control of the people and the conditions surrounding me. While those words absolute dependence may look like a gimmick, they were the ones that helped to trigger my release into my present degree of stability and quietness of mind, qualities which I am now trying to consolidate by offering love to others, regardless of the return to me.
So Bill is sharing with us here is that once he was able to own this absolute dependence, this emotional dependency he had, he was now able to really self-regulate, which means when he was knocked off balance, instead of looking at whose fault it was, he started to look at where he was off. In step 10, he talks about it's being a spiritual axiom that every time I'm disturbed, no matter the cost, something is wrong with me. I like to think about it as something is off with me. What's off with me is I have an expectation, an unenforceable rule, a claim, or a demand that things should be a certain way. And when things don't go the way I think they should, I get knocked off balance. And when I realize that this is my idea about how things are supposed to be, it doesn't mean that's the way things are. That then I can apply this new consciousness that says, it's not about life being what it should be. It's about me coping with life as it is. That's what emotional sobriety is about. It's about being aligned with reality, facing reality and dealing with reality. And I, much like the person that was writing the graffiti on the bathroom wall at Cal State Long Beach when I was as an undergraduate in psychology, and we were doing a research project, we were going around to all the different bathrooms and collecting the different graffiti in like the psychology department, sociology department, down at the gym, down over in the expressive arts department, over at mathematics department. And we wanted to see, was there a different content, well, in the bathroom in the psychology building, somebody had this saying that went, life is for people who can't handle drugs. I mean, totally turned the whole deal around, right? Life is for people who can't handle drugs. Well, that was my philosophy, right? I thought freedom through better chemistry. So here we come to essential insight number 5. No one is coming. I am the one I've been waiting for. This is the realization that we have to make if we're going to achieve emotional sobriety in our life. But what are the origins of this notion that someone is going to come along in our life and to fix things? Well, I used to think that it came out of some kind of a distorted thinking, but I've revised my thinking about that. I think that this is a normal part of our development. And here's why. Is we develop in stages in life. It occurs, our cognitive development occurs in stages, biologically, physically, we develop in different stages. We go from an undifferentiated state within our mother's womb to a state of greater differentiation, which means we go from environmental support to self-support. So what does this mean? Well, early on, we are completely fused with our mother in the womb. We are 100% dependent on her for our support. We need her to provide us oxygen through the umbilical cord. We need her to provide us with nourishment, with all of the sustenance we're going to need to grow ourselves. We are now provided security and safety. We have a 24-hour Uber system. She takes us wherever she goes without even charging us. I mean, we are 100% fused with mom. So we are dependent. We start this world in a state of complete environmental dependency, needing environmental support to be okay. And then we're born, right? We come into our life. And as soon as that umbilical cord is cut, we have to take the first step towards self-support. Now, isn't it interesting that breathing is so important in terms of yoga and all kinds of therapies and et cetera, et cetera. But our first act of self-support is to inhale and exhale. We take oxygen in and we blow carbon dioxide out. We are now providing ourselves what we need from our environment by taking over responsibility for respiration. A child is born prematurely, they have to be put in an incubator. Somebody else has to continue to do it for them until they biologically matured to the point of taking this step towards self-support. That is the first step of an ongoing journey that's going to continue for the rest of your life. The rest of your life, you're going to be moving from a state or transcending your need for environmental support to self-support. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't need what's going on in the environment, because that child can't be born into a vacuum. In the atmosphere, there must be oxygen to support the child, but it's the child's responsibility to interact and to make contact with the environment, to take from the environment which it needs for its growth and support. That's what self-support means. It doesn't mean I am independent. It means that I act on my own behalf and make contact with what's going on in my environment to satisfy my needs and desires. Now, that process that moves us towards this process of growing, of self-support, we can think of as self-actualization. And it is interesting that Jung wrote the following to Bill Wilson in January 30, 1961, when talking about his patient, Roland Hazard. He was saying that Roland's craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness. You see, I can see for me that I turn to drinking and using other drugs to give me a sense of freedom, to give me a sense of emotional freedom. And I think that's what this wholeness is, or holiness is a movement towards us being free. That's the process. I'm no longer needing mom to breathe for me. I'm free now. I breathe for myself. And every step we take along this process of differentiation is to create a greater and greater sense of freedom in our life. So I see that as a very natural thing. Now, it shows up, this strong desire to actualize our potential grabs hold of certain things in our lives and now incorporates these into our consciousness or into our development. This is Dr. Alexander Lowen. He's the father of bioenergetics. He trained with Wilhelm Reich, who was a student of Freud's, and it was the first body-oriented psychotherapy. Reich is responsible for all of the body work you guys are seeing and hearing about today. Peter Levine's work, Bessel van der Kolk, all of these other folks, they all come from Wilhelm Reich, and Lowen brought a lot of that to the United States. Peter Levine's work, I think, was very heavily influenced by Lowen. This is what Lowen says: where a person experiences a loss or trauma in childhood that undermines that child's sense of security and self-acceptance, the child would project into his image of the future the requirement that it reverse the experiences of the past. Now, why does a child do that? If a child's abused, why is that child looking to the future for them to be okay? Because we have to find some way to ensure our existence. And if we didn't have hope that things could be different, what would happen? Well, we would probably, if we were abused, as many kids do that can't find that hope, they suicide. They take their life. Why bother to go on? Now, thankfully, most of us aren't that hopeless, that we can see that maybe there's a new possibility for us. But notice what happens. When we make this decision, our well-being now is dependent on our experience being different in the past. It's not dependent on us being different. It's dependent on us having a different experience. That difference, as subtle as it may be, is huge, because it puts the responsibility of things being different outside of ourselves. We externalize our locus of influence. That's the emotional dependency. Now, of course, it's natural, because up to this point in our life, everything was taken care of for us. If we were hungry, we were fed. If we were cold, we were given a jacket. Now, later on, we had to act on our behalf, but early on, all these needs were met. So I don't think it's a big stretch that we idealize this and project this into the future. So we are constantly actualizing our potential. We use whatever behavior and thoughts are available to ensure our wholeness, to ensure our existence. And sometimes the things we pick up to ensure are not the greatest solutions in the world. They're the best adaptation we could take at the time, but it doesn't mean they're the best that we can do for ourselves. And this is where we become compromised. Our development becomes compromised. So instead of continuing to grow into who we can be, we start to grow into who we should be. And the minute we reject ourselves for an ideal of who we should be, more trouble is introduced into our life. Now our life is run by these shoulds, by these expectations, by the supposed tos, and we take a second seat because we believe, and this is one of the, I talk a lot in this chapter about what the difference between nurturing ideas and attitudes versus toxic ideas and attitudes. This is an incredibly toxic idea that I need things to be different for me to be okay. I need you to be different for me to be okay. I need life to be different for me to be okay. I need life to be what I think it should be for me to be okay. This is utter nonsense. And it takes us off in a terrible veer. And now all of our abilities, get developed around trying to manipulate and control situations because of the anxiety that comes up. If things aren't going to be the way that I think they should be, I'm not going to be okay. And that experience of anxiety creates control. And we try to control the conditions and people surrounding us to act the way we think they should act for us to be all right. This is how our life becomes unmanageable. This is the second half of the first step. This desperation that I need things to be different creates the illusions that somehow the solution lies outside of myself. Well, that illusion creates more desperation. And I'm caught in this vicious cycle that Lowen talks about. And instead of giving up the cycle, I just try harder to control. I try to become more clever, more manipulative, sneakier, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this shows up in relationships. This shows up very strongly. James Hollis, he's a Jungian psychotherapist. He wrote a book called The Eden Project, In Search of the Magical Other. Oh, the magical other, that one person that's out there that if they come into my life, they will solve all of my dilemmas. They will make me whole. Well, this is what he says, these 4 principles that operate in relationships. It looks like this. The first principle is he says, what we do not know about ourselves. And this is why what I said before, our awareness of what we're doing and how we're doing it becomes so important. He says, what we do not know about ourselves and what we cannot do for ourselves will be projected onto our partner. We make our partner responsible to fill in the gaps in our development, to fill in the holes in our development. What we do not know about ourselves and what we cannot do for ourselves will be projected. Now, I don't know I'm doing this. This is unconscious. This is an unconscious process, but it shows up with all of the power struggles that occur in a relationship, because that's what happens. He says we project our childhood wounds, our infantile longings to be okay, that somebody's going to solve our problems, and our individuation imperative. Think of that as our desire for self-actualization, our movement towards wholeness. That's what the individuation imperative is, onto our partner. We make them responsible to be the parent that we never have. We make them responsible to give us a self-esteem that we never had. We make them responsible to make us feel safe if we've never felt safe. We make them responsible to grow ourselves up. So we turn our partners into our parents. And then since our partner is doing the same thing, there's a whole battle that takes place in terms of who's going to get their needs met first. I mean, are you going to take care of me or am I going to take care of you? Wow. It's amazing the struggles that occur. So we project onto our partner the responsibility to fill our holes, to fill the gaps in our development, to do for us what we aren't able to do for ourselves. See, that's how this shows up. So we got to wait for it, but here it comes. Principle number 3. Since our partner cannot nor should not bear responsibility for our wounds, our narcissism, our individuation, our projections, our demands, give way to resentment, which results in the problem of power and manipulation. Well, you're not being a very loving partner because you said that to me. You're not being this, you're not being that. You know, I'm doing all of these things unconsciously to manipulate you and try to get you into taking responsibility for what I need to be responsible for. And I'm not even aware I'm doing that. So what do we do with this? Well, he's got a suggestion for us. But I have to, this before we get to that. This is what Dr. Jerry Greenwald says. He says, expectations lead to the erosion of any relationship. The myth that the resolution of my loneliness will result because I have found an intimate one-on-one relationship is a cop-out. It doesn't work. See, it's the same thing that Dr. Hollis was talking about. He says it begins a toxic process which dissipates the mutual nourishment that occurs when both people are committed to sustaining, nourishing interaction and growth of their separate selves. See, for a lot of people, it's a shock to have this idea put forth that we are not responsible for our partner's feelings. We're responsible for our own feelings. We're not responsible for our partner. Even if we're married, we're not responsible for them. They're responsible for themselves. But we can't get that if we're emotionally dependent, because our emotional dependency says, of course, we're responsible for each other, because that's the only way we're going to be taken care of. So we have to promote that responsibility. That's a very undifferentiated consciousness. As our consciousness moves towards freedom, we realize that I am responsible ultimately for what I feel, for what I experience, for getting my needs met. So that was the fourth thing that Dr. Hollis talked about, is he says in the fourth state is that we have to take responsibility for ourselves if we're going to get out of that mess that we've created. So let's look at this movement from environmental support to self-support. Well, Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt therapy, described it as this way. Maturing is the transcendence from environmental support to self-support. So as you saw, we start out life by being incredibly dependent on our environment for everything. But as we grow, first by taking a breath, at a year, we start to learn to walk. After we figure out the crawling thing, language develops. We're constantly moving towards supporting ourselves. But that emotional growth is so dependent, just like we were when we were in the womb, of a certain kind of an experience we have in terms of attachment. And there's been a lot of research done around that. If we have a secure attachment in our life, then we start to grow with the sense of ourselves as that I'm able to grow and take care of myself. But if the attachment I experience is chaotic or insecure or inconsistent, then my development is going to be impaired. Now, it doesn't mean that I can't figure that out later in life. It's just going to mean that I'm going to end up doing what Lowen talked about, is if I didn't have the right attachment growing up, I'm going to expect my wife to be attached to me in a certain way that corrects that. See, I'm going to project onto that person the need for the attachment that I have for a secure attachment, because we all wanted that. I'm going to want my partner to make me feel okay all the time. Well, that never happens. So what is this vision of being able to support ourselves and to grow ourselves along these lines? Well, this is what Dr. Greenwald says. He says, one of the hallmarks of creative intimacy, which is, we could also say, emotional sobriety, emotional maturity, is the absence of shoulds or must or other demands on ourselves or others. Pay attention in this next week how many times you use the word should, or how many demands you make on yourself or others. See if you can start to replace shoulds with I want to or I don't want to. You see, shoulds turn what our desires are into kind of a demand. You shouldn't do that. You should be this way. And they're also incredibly shaming. And in order to support ourselves, we need to let go of these shoulds and start to stand for what we want and for what we'd like, what we don't want, what we don't like. Instead of saying to somebody, you shouldn't talk to me that way. I don't like you talking to me that way. Own it. Instead of invoking some higher power, like there's a 10 commandment that says they shouldn't talk to you that way. Well, no, Moses did not leave a 10 commandment about that. That's your desire, because you're not standing up and supporting yourself. So we replace self-support with environmental support, and we grab hold of these things as though they're a crutch that they're going to support us to create the life that we want to create, and they don't do that. They're an example, they're a symptom of our dependency. No shoulds, no supposed tos. Only I want, I don't want. That's what Dr. Kempler said to me. When you become an adult, there's only two reasons to do something, because you want to or you don't. No other reason. Well, aren't you supposed to do things? Aren't you supposed to do things that you don't want to do? Isn't that part of life? I said, well, it's part of your life. That's what I say to somebody who asked me the question. It's not part of my life. I don't do anything I don't want to do anymore. If I can't turn it into what I want to, I don't do it. Not interested in living life like that anymore. Now, I might be able to go from I don't want to I want to. If Susie asked me to do something and my first response is no, I could find out why it's so important to her and try to understand what it means to her. And maybe that'll turn my I don't want to into an I want to, and it might not. But then I have to risk disappointing Susie. Right? How am I going to do that? See, if part of the thing is I gotta please everybody in order to be okay, now my fear of disappointing someone comes up. Well, if I really stop back and think about that for a minute, I'd say, you know, she may be disappointed. It's okay. That just means whatever she wanted was important to her. Doesn't mean it has to be important to me. And I can trust that Susie will deal with it. And I can know that my job is not to live my life so that Susie's never disappointed. It's up to Susie to figure that out. Susie's going, darn it, I thought I had him for a minute. No, that one won't work. So this is Rollo May, and he goes, one can define mental health from one side as the capacity to be aware of the gap between the stimulus and response, together with the capacity to use this gap constructively. That's what I'm saying, is that if Susie asks me for something, I don't have to react. I could tell her, you know, my first response is no, but I'd like to learn more. I can create the gap. And then once I go into that gap, I can weigh out, get in touch with what's important to me, and make a decision based on what's important to me. So that way the relationship remains very personal. Well, Viktor Frankl, it's so interesting. He said the same thing. So this must be an important truth in life. He said it this way. He said, there is a space between the stimulus and our response. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Try to live there in that space. It's the same thing Dr. Rollo May was recommending, is getting into the gap and then using that gap to decide what's your best possible response. Best being what's most important to you. Bill Wilson says the same thing. Restraint of tongue and pen, right? Don't just react, step back for a while, process what's going on. Bill calls it living in the pause. They're all recommending the same thing, because our reactivity is created by our anxiety. And when we are anxious, you are not going to be responding from the best in you. You're going to probably be responding from the worst in you, or what Bill calls our Mr. Hyde. So he goes on to define, well, what is emotional freedom? Because remember, we're going to equate emotional sobriety with this emotional freedom. And emotional freedom, from his perspective, is a quality of action of the centered self, not the self-centered self, the centered self, right? Being clear about what's important to me. We call that self-differentiation. Freedom, by its very nature, can be located only in the self acting as the totality, meaning acting from our wholeness of considering all the different parts of us that in response to whatever we're being challenged, we're being met with. This is the centered self, a self that acts from integrity, and use integrity as wholeness here, considering all the things that are important to us and resolving the parts where we're in conflict. Dr. Miriam Polster and Dr. Miriam and Irv Polster said the same thing. If our freedom depends exclusively on another person allowing it, we lose our own sense of the part we must exercise in protecting and defining our own psychological space. This is what we mean when we say no one is coming. That we have to learn how to show up for ourselves, how to take care of ourselves, how to grow ourselves, or what I've been using the term today as self-support, right? Now, there's a study area that you can learn more about. Maybe this can be put in the chat, that is for a very low cost a month. You get access to all my videos and my talks, my audio talks and stuff, but plus you meet with Herb once a month for an hour a month. And if you can't make that meeting, those things are recorded and available to you. It's been a very, very productive study area, and we're hoping it's going to continue to grow. And what else? And here's my contact information. And now we can open this up. And like I said, the repairman hasn't showed up yet, but I might have to step out for a minute. When I do, Susie will answer any question.
I'll answer. Yeah, I'll be really good at it too. Thank you very much, Alan. You know, I took lots of notes, even though I know I can re-listen to the talk today, just like you. You know, I met Alan months ago, and he changed my life because I didn't know how to think independently. I was raised not to think that way, and so I had to have someone teach me, and it's worked. Maybe some people in my family don't like that, but I'm pretty independent now, and I like that. So if you have questions, were you going to say something, Alan?
No, I said that's why I'm getting the notes from them.
Yeah.
What are you doing there? Leave her alone. God, quit changing her.
Before we go on, I'm going to say something personal. Yesterday, my sister-in-law came to visit me with her granddaughter. I have not seen my sister-in-law in 3 years. She lives in Mount Prospect, right down the street from where I live. But we just are not a close family. And I was listening to her talk, and I thought, oh my gosh, we're just a terrible system of undifferentiation, and I have gone beyond that, you know, but Julie hasn't. And it was very interesting to sit back and listen to what she said and to respond, being true to myself.
Yeah,
and it's so time in my life.
Yeah, and how you can see it. It gets so clear after you come out of the forest that you can see the forest. And it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
How
it
it
really,
was happening all
really
the
was.
time. We never realized what was going on.